presentation is very much a abridged version of all the research material that I have on Sovereign of the Seas, and it explores the reasons for her conception, a bit about her construction and her career. I could talk for hours on her design and construction, and I'm happy to do this. So either as a second part, which I've just mentioned, or just to anybody who wishes to listen, really. Because the ship was a bit of a mystery as to how she really looked, we must rely on the artists of the time for our knowledge. The most notable of these was Willem van der Velde de Oude, whose drawings gave insight into many warships of the time. In more recent times, James Sefton spent 40 years researching and documenting the ship and its history, and this is the main source of information on her. Even more recently, John Mackay, a drafter specialising in historical ship design, and a team of naval architects and graphic designers undertook a reconstruction on paper of the ship, using all known data and filling in the gaps with the practice of the time using Dean's Treatise of Naval Architecture. This work has reconstructed a full set of lines and plans for the ship and is net as an amazing reference work. Before we get into the ship itself, we need to understand something about the politics and the atmosphere of the time. The Tudor Navy, which had once been powerful enough to take on the Spanish Armada, went into steep decline after Queen Elizabeth I died, and the peace-loving James I was on the throne. It has also been noted that being a Scotsman, James had no love for the English Navy. By the time James' son, Charles I, was crowned in 1625, its state was deplorable and unacceptable to the new king. He realised the prestige of his nation was being lost and was determined to rebuild his navy to restore English maritime power. Also, there was a keeping up with the Joneses attitude prevailing between the monarchs of Europe, who each vied to have bigger and better, more extravagant than the rest. By February 1627, his thinking had evolved, and he addressed the 12 judges of the Star Chamber, who were the heads of the English judiciary. And he sent them 3 questions: whether they considered that the king, under the Great Seal of Office, was charged by God to be the protector of the realm and to form a navy as he saw fit. 2, whether may not the king, under the Great Seal of England, command all subjects at their charge to provide and furnish ships for such time as he shall think fit. And 3, and whether in such cases is not the king the sole judge both of the danger and when and how the same is to be avoided. The judges answered, "May it please your most excellent majesty, we are of the opinion that the king hath all such rights as he has enumerated under the Great Seal." Charles now felt he had the legal authority to tell his nation to build warships, and he embarked on a programme of construction that was financed by the notorious ship money. This was not a new form of raising money. Its origins were medieval, and traditionally it did not require Parliament's approval, but it was usually only levied when the country was under the threat of war, and it was traditionally applied to coastal areas only. Charles I extended ship money to the whole country, getting round the need to consult Parliament by not asking the boroughs for money, but instead to supply him with completed ships. This produced wide resentment because it was a time of peace and because Parliament felt it should have been consulted over what in effect had become general taxation. This became a contributory factor in the popular discontent that led to the Civil War, in which Charles lost his throne and his head. The largest of the ships of the King's new programme, and the greatest warship built to date, was to be more than 90 guns and was later to be named Sovereign of the Seas by Charles. He wanted a ship that showed prestige and extravagance and regularly referred to it as his grand design. Although the requests for designs went out to several shipwrights, the ultimate builder had already been chosen by the king. Phineas Pett, who seems to have produced unorthodox designs, wrote in his autobiography, "His Majesty came to Woolwich in his barge to see the frame of the Leopard, then half built, and being in the ship's hold, His Highness called me aside. He stated his wish to build a great new ship, which he would have me to undertake, using these words to me: you have made many requests to me, and now I make this request to you to build this ship." The following August, Charles told his shipwrights of his plans for the ship and her proposed dimensions. Because of the ship's size, the technical as well as political opposition to the project became as legendary as the ship itself. The best known resistance to building such a large ship came from the Masters of Trinity House, a charity whose first concern was to safeguard sailors and shipping. They put their objections in writing. The first proposed dimensions of Sovereign of the Seas are mentioned in it. The Master's concern, because of her size, over anchoring and safe mooring from the point of view of maintaining lives, is most profound. Nevertheless, these objections had been overcome by April 1635, when her first set of dimensions were agreed, with a wildly optimistic initial estimated cost of £13,860 by Phineas Pett, who was to give assurances to finisher for £16,000. Phineas Pett and his son Peter were instructed to design the ship, which they did in the usual manner by building a model. But Peter was put in charge of the actual construction. These are our principal dimensions. As you can see, a length between perpendiculars is 159 foot 10 inches. Overall length was 232 feet. A moulded beam was 46 foot 6 inches, and a draft in seawater 21 foot 1 inch. And a gross tonnage was 1,522 long tons. It was estimated that there could have been as many as 10,000 trees felled to build her. This is in addition to those trees already in stock at the shipyard. The keel was laid on the 21st of December 1635 at Woolwich Royal Dockyard in southeast London. It was 127 feet long and made of straight lengths of sawn elm scarfed together. This was unusual for the time, as solid elm, from whole trees, were usually joined with doublers and iron bolts. The frames along the keel were 2 foot 6 inches square, spaced 2 foot 6 inches apart. The keelson was constructed the same as the keel, but from seasoned English oak. Her outer planking was elm, 9 inches thick by 14 inches wide. Construction of the hull took 20 months and was complete by August 1637. A ship of such size required a spring tide on the Thames to launch, so the date was set for the first suitable tide, the 25th of September 1637. Unhappily, with the king and his royal entourage present, the launch failed when the ship jammed on the slipway. This was set right, and at the next spring tide on the 14th of October 1637, she successfully entered the water, but with far less ceremony than had been originally planned. This is a pen and ink drawing of the hull made by Willem van der Velde the Elder some time after her launch. By May 1638, Sovereign of the Seas had been moved to Erith in Kent to be masted and rigged, and then sailed to Greenhithe in Kent to be armed and provisioned. The table shows the cannon that were installed in the ship as its original fit. As can be seen from this, 46 and 32 pounders were installed on the lower gun deck, 18 pounders on the middle and 12 pounders on the upper deck. However, the fact that 102 guns were installed did not mean that they could all be fired, as some of the ports were unable to be used because of obstructions and rigging. Only 98 cannon could be fired without damaging the ship. Sea trials began on the 12th of July 1638, and on the 21st the King gave the ship his approval. This is an engraving of the ship under full sail done by John Payne in 1638. You will notice that the term matey to describe the King. This appears to have been an acceptable way of addressing the King when written. As the ship's design had evolved, including the ornate carving and gilding ordered by the King, the cost far exceeded the £13,860 original estimate. Phineas Pett's original estimate included being ready for sea for a 6-month commission. However, just getting the hull into the water was 3 times that much. And it doesn't say whether he was only, I can't know whether he was only paid the £16,000 he said he'd do it for. Whilst she was not the first 3-decker with complete gun batteries on 3 flush decks in the English Navy, that honour had fallen to the Prince Royal. She was the first to carry the magic number of 100 guns as built. As stated earlier, John Mackay and his team conducted a virtual reconstruction of the ship, which was published in 2020. This is a 3D visualisation of the hull as built in 1637, showing the highly decorated stern and sides, all of which was gilded using 2 tons of gold. And just what a beautiful ship she was. You will notice that the underwater area is white. This was a treatment of white lead and tree resin, and before the days of coppering. This is the waterline reconstruction of the ship fully rigged. 2 views of the decorations of the stern castle, and I'll give you a moment just to have a look at that lot. On the surviving shipwrights notes, there were 2 versions of the beakhead decoration. It is not known which was finally installed in the ship. And once again, I'll give you a few moments just to look at them. This is the only known painting of the completed ship. She is presented alongside Peter Pett, the shipwright, who oversaw her construction. Placed in commission on the 28th of August 1638 and remained at sea until the 9th of June 1641. There is no record of where she was stationed during this time. At about this time, a Dutch admiral christened her the Golden Devil, and this nickname stuck all through the rest of her career. On the 10th of June 1641, she was laid up in ordinary in the River Medway for the next 4 years. During 1644, she was totally refitted. At this point, Charles insisted that her complement of guns be increased. So 3 more guns were added to bring the grand total up to 105. This involved replacing 22 of the middle gun deck 18-pound culverin fortifieds with 18-pound culverin drakes, which took a smaller powder charge and were lighter. The extra cannon amounted to a purely cosmetic change done to outdo the French, who had just built a ship with more cannon than Sovereign. However, more guns did not change the number of usable gun ports, which still stood at 98. Other than the revised armament, there are no surviving records of what else was done to her. She was then laid up in ordinary all through the Civil War. When Parliament gained control of the Navy after the Civil War, Sovereign of the Seas was renamed Parliament in 1650. There are accounts of her being renamed Commonwealth instead of Parliament, but I found no evidence to back that up. By the 22nd of October 1651, it was decided that the ship was crank, i.e. top-heavy, and the Navy Office reported that they had debated the issue in response to a letter from Chatham Dockyard of 11th of October earlier that year, which stated, "As to the Parliament, we conceive that to make her more serviceable than she now is, the gratings and upper deck in the midships be taken down and the side lowered to the upper edge of the ports in the midships, the upper stateroom to be taken away, the forecastle to be lowered 6 feet to 6 feet high, and the works abaft to be taken down proportionately to the waist and answerable to the shear of the work fore and aft, the half deck to be shortened as shall be convenient, as also the head to be made shorter and so fitted for sea, and the gallery to be altered as may be comely and most convenient for service." Some of that's a bit vague, but there we are. These alterations were performed at Chatham Dockyard on the River Medway in Kent. According to the shipyard notes at the time, it does not seem that very much material had to be removed from the ship to gain the promised foot of freeboard. According to Dean's Treatise on Naval Architecture, the lowest gun port of a man of war should be at least 4 foot 6 inches above the low waterline, whereas at commissioning, Sovereign of the Seas lower gun port freeboard was a disappointing 3 foot 6. This refit also saw the end of the decoration and gilding, which was removed throughout the entire hull. This was an attempt to remove all evidence of royal involvement with the ship. Taking down the upper deck in the midships has been taken by some historians to mean that Parliament was reduced to a 90-gun ship, but this does not seem to have been the case. Only the uppermost section of her rails were lowered. In March 1652, she was recommissioned and served in the Channel Squadron. On the 28th of September 1652, during the First Dutch War, Parliament fought at the Battle of Kentish Knock. Near the end of the fight, she ran aground, but managed to return to port, where she sat out the balance of the war, laid up in ordinary. It is during this war that the Dutch government offered a 3,000 guilder reward to any ship that sank her. Captain John Taylor, the master shipwright at Chatham Dockyard, supervised a rebuild of Parliament from 1659 to 1660. In a recollection, Robert Lee, a later master shipwright of Chatham, refers to her first alterations as well as this rebuild and says that her principal dimensions were not changed either time. Neither were her original timbers. She rejoined the Channel Squadron during early 1660. At the restoration of King Charles later in 1660, the ship was renamed Royal Sovereign by the King. She was then laid up in ordinary on the River Medway for the 5 years from August 1660 to March 1665. She then rejoined the Channel Squadron on the 28th of August 1665. During the Second Dutch War, Royal Sovereign found port at the 4 days battle from the 1st to the 4th of June 1666, at the St James's Day fight on the 25th of July 1666, and was present at the Battle of the Nore Sandbank on the 26th of July 1666. There are reports that during the Second Dutch War, she actually sank a ship, but there is no accurate records to say which one that was or when it happened. She was then put into Portsmouth for repairs during September 1666. Following the burning of the English fleet off Chatham in Kent in 1667, Royal Sovereign was the only English first rate to survive the Second Anglo-Dutch War. She was laid up in ordinary on the River Medway at the end of the war in 1667 for 5 years. She once again rejoined the Channel Squadron on the 23rd of March 1672 for the Third Anglo-Dutch War and fought at the Texel on the 11th of August 1673. She served here until the end of the war in 1674. By August of 1675, it was realised that Royal Sovereign was in a poor state of repair and needed another rebuild. It was then suggested by the master shipwright at Chatham that when this work was performed, she should be given a full modernisation. A second surveyor's report was produced in 1680, but this concerned her deteriorated structure and did not suggest large design changes. It was not until 10 years after the original report that work finally began in 1685, conducted by Robert Lee. But as there are no further records of what was done, it is assumed that she was given a large rebuild that increased her size and changed her looks considerably. She rejoined the Channel Squadron in 1686 and served with it until 1693. During this time, she fought at Beachy Head on the 30th of June 1690 and at Barfleur and Le Hogue from the 19th of May to the 4th of June 1692. At the end of William III's war with France, she was laid up in ordinary on the River Medway. She burned to the waterline on the 29th of January 1696 at the grand old age of 59. Most sources agree that the fire was started by an unattended candle that a boatswain of the caretaker crew had left in his cabin. As the boatswain concerned was flogged, discharged from the Navy, and spent the rest of his life in jail, it is quite probable that the fire was deliberate. During her career, she was the most impressive ship in the English Navy. However, she was laid up for around 50% of the time, and because of her size, was considered a white elephant by the Admiralty. She was slow and difficult to manoeuvre, which made her susceptible to the gunfire of the average-sized ship at the time. This was a sad end to the career of a groundbreaking ship that even at her launch was described by one English admiral as utterly beautiful and graceful, but as a ship of war, totally useless.